afternoon, everyone. On behalf of NACTE, the Nebraska Association for Colleges of Teacher Education, we want to thank you so much. We are so honored to be here with you today and be a part of the organization. Again, I just want to introduce the executive committee. Let me make sure I can work this clicker. The Nebraska Association for Colleges of Teacher Education, NCTE, is an organization made up of all 16 institutions in Nebraska with teacher prep programs. And so, again, with us today is Dr. Sarah Skretta, who is at UNL, and Dr. April Bushelman at Creighton, and I'm Jenny Jansky from UNK. We also have on our executive committee, who is a big part of the summit that we put on, is Dr. Brenda Sankey from Concordia, and also Dr. Tim Fry from Doe. Woo, here we go. All right, and there we are. That is our executive team, and the clicker ran away from me. So, there we go. On the screen, you will see the institutions that are part of our NACTE group. I'm not going to read them to you, but there are 16 of us in the state of Nebraska, and we represent private schools, public schools, large institutions, small institutions. Our NACTE group we're small and mighty. We have no paid staff, but we do come together 3 times a year to meet to discuss various topics. Next slide. Thank you for starting my clicker. So AACTE, so we are NACTE, NACTE. AACTE is the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. And what I just need you to know about AACTE is that we are the Nebraska chapter, and they are the premier authority on teacher education or higher education in the U.S., and there are over 800 institutions that are a part of AACTE, and they were a big part of making the summit possible for us. So, NACTE, like I said, we come together 3 times a year, and what do? When we get together, we talk about current legislative issues, state board issues. We're also a stakeholder to the Nebraska Colleges of Teacher Education, NCTE, which is a stakeholder group to the board. And what we really spend probably most of our time in working on best practices and how are we all, as a group, as institutions, producing better teachers for the state of Nebraska. All right, next. So one of the big topics, no surprise here, that we talk about is the Nebraska teacher shortage. And so now April's going to go through some of the data that she compiled for us.
All right, so every year, each school district has to submit their reports to the Nebraska Department of Education saying how many teachers they have teaching within their endorsement area, out of endorsement area, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been doing that and compiling the data, and since 2013-ish was when we started getting actual consistent questions every single time. And so we get the reports every year. All the schools get the reports. You can find them online. But what hasn't been happening is actually combining the reports to look for trend data. And so that's what I wanted to look at, and that's what I did. And you're going to be excited to see I just updated it. So you've never seen these slides. Nobody's seen these slides, but you've seen something similar, some of you. But this whole thing is not just a Nebraska issue. And so we're going to start with the national trends, and then we're going to go into the state trends. Next slide, please. All right, this is kind of hard to see, but it really, all you have to really pay attention to is how everything's down, right? All the lines are going down. And what this slide is looking at is the percent change in enrollment in actual colleges, right, in 4-year colleges. And all the different colors represent each year, and then each set represents a different type of school. So there's going from left to right. I think you can read it, but if not, it's all of them combined, and then we have private and public and 2-year and 4-year schools. But this is really just looking at how enrollment in general in the college and university sector is declining. Okay, and the furthest right is the private for-profit ones. which, you know, we're kind of okay with, but it still is just showing a general decline. Now, part of this is all due to population. Okay, population in general has been declining every year since 2013, and a large part of that is due to the recession, right? That 2008 recession, people decided, wait, we can't afford to have children anymore, we're not going to have children anymore, or as many. And so that's going to have a large impact. And at the college and university level, we're actually calling it the Great Enrollment Cliff. Okay, and so that enrollment cliff should be happening around 2026. Next slide, please. Forecasted change in the state of Nebraska area is that the enrollment in general in universities and colleges will go down 11%. That's, again, just in general. And again, we're looking at that at 2026. And that includes now the trickle-down effect, right, which actually starts with you guys first, with fewer enrollment, lower enrollment at the K-12 level. And so fewer high school graduates are expected between 2014 and 2023 before it changes again. And between 2027 and 2032, the average size will, of course, then decline, and private high schools are going to see an even sharper decline. That's what's predicted. Okay, now again, that's not me saying this is fact, but that is what is predicted. Colleges and universities are already prepping for this. Again, we're calling it the Great Enrollment Cliff. And 2026 is what we're looking at. Next slide, please. So looking at your K-12 enrollment, this is the predictions, again, based on trend data nationally, for changes in terms of the demographic of the students you're going to see. Right? So blue is white race, green is Hispanic, yellow, gold, I don't know what it actually looks like for you guys, but yellow is black, then we have Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, and then multiracial. And so you can also see that shift in there. And so when we talk about teacher shortage, we don't want to leave out the fact that we just need more teachers. We really want to see the mirrors for our students, right? Not just the windows. We want to be representative of our student population. And so I think it's important for us to show this as well and actually just keep it in your mind. To look at those enrollment trends that, yes, we're losing some of our population, but we also need to be aware that our demographic is changing, and I know we all are, right? But I just want to show you nationally it's changing as well, not just Nebraska. So why are we not going to college? Next slide, please. So here are the three top, according to a Princeton review, here are the three top reasons students are not attending college anymore. And of course, cost, right? And in this Princeton Review survey, 98% of families require financial aid. 98% require financial aid in order to go to school. 82% said it is vital and extremely necessary to have it. Okay, so there's a few out there that require financial aid, but maybe could have done it without. But 82% said there's no way. We have to have financial aid in order to go to school. The second one is engagement. And if you are able to engage your students by their freshman or sophomore year in the fact that they can go to school and it's okay to go to school and you can and use financial aid if it's possible, they are way more likely to attend a college or university than if you wait until their senior year to start doing those enrollment ideas and conversations. And I know at our elementary schools, we're already starting it, right? We have college weeks, we have pick your own school, you know, do your research papers in middle school and things like that. And that's really important. So please note that the things you're doing are actually very important. Get them engaged into this and into the teaching field, right? That's really where I'm going with all of this is teaching's great, right? We chose the best profession in the entire world. And that's what message we have to get out there. And then the last one is relevancy. Only 16% of students said that the outreach they received from their school, so this engagement, this pick your own school, all this stuff, only 16% thought it was relevant to them. All right, so while you're thinking about these programs and while you're thinking about these activities and conversations you're going to have, it's key to make it relevant and to make it something possible for them. All right, so where are we at for enrollment? This is the national data trend for enrollment in teacher prep programs. Okay, again, national. So the very top one, that's the decline in enrollment. The bottom line is the decline or the trend for completers. So even though we're getting people enrolled, they're not making it through the entire program as well. And so nationally, again, we're seeing this decline. It's not just population, it's completers also. So what's happening during those 4 years? And that's what we're looking at as well. How is it looking? What's causing them to turn away? And so colleges and universities are working on that, but we need, that early engagement. Here's what you should do, here's a good idea for you. Encourage them to be those teachers. Like, I really see this for you, this would be a good option. So nationally, as of 2017, there was a 38% decline. In Nebraska, there was a 48% decline in terms of enrollment. And of course, completion has been dropping as well. Okay, so that is all of our national data. Now let's look at state specific. So every data slide from here on out, you have access to all of the information. It comes from those teacher shortage surveys or the teacher vacancy report that NACTE does every year. So what I did is I went back to 2015 to the comments because I'm assuming that is the first year that comments were allowed. And I found the trends and I saw the commonalities and they're highlighted in there. And then when I add, first off, I do need to note, I do not have 2020, 2021 data reported on here because the participation rate from schools was so low, which of course it was COVID, right? And it was incredibly, incredibly low. So if you're ever like, well, wait, that would look different, it might. I mean, it definitely would, but the participation rate was way low, and statistically, that's my asterisk, okay? Okay, so when you look at all these, you can see starting in 2016, the statement applicant pool was smaller than in the past. And then it starts saying it continues to be smaller, it continues to be smaller, all the way through. So that's our yellow area. Green is that there are less qualified candidates applying. Now, if you've ever completed the survey for your school, you'll know that you only have specific options to put in there. And there are two options for this, that they were not qualified by attributes, or they were not qualified by actual certification. Okay, so attributes could be personality, maybe they totally bombed the interview, something along those lines, or it could just be certification. So that's not delineated in the comments. And then blue is elementary. We started seeing an elementary decline in 2015, but without the trend data, it's just like, oh yeah, we're missing a few elementary teachers, oh yeah, we're missing a few. When you look at it, it's growing, right? If you actually look at the trends, you can see what's happening. And then in 2019 and 2021, that's when the idea of certification came up as being difficult. It's hard to get certified in Nebraska. And we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but those are the common comments. Okay, so what is actually happening? This is going to look really crazy. These are the endorsement offerings that we have, okay? And the one that's not on there is actually special education. And I don't have it on there because it is so much bigger. It is such a huge shortage area that if I put that up there, all these other ones would just be smushed. So do keep in mind, I do have special education at the top. The other ones that are listed, this has shifted a little bit from the last time I did these reports. Okay, so the other ones listed, if you go to the very right of the graph, they are listed in order down. Okay, so like the very top dot is language arts. So we saw a huge increase in language arts or English teachers this year, shortage. And then we have elementary, which is yellow. So if you look at that yellow elementary trend line, had we started this, 4 years ago, we may have seen that trend right away. But it's skyrocketing, all of these are. Science is the next one, that's the blue one. You can see the great increase in that one. And then career ed. Career ed, I feel, is really misleading because it actually combines so many different endorsement areas. BMIT, computer science, ag ed, family consumer science, all those. And then black and gray are math and world language. So when you look at this graph, your y-axis, that's the actual count. That's the number of vacant positions, okay, within the state across the years. All right, so we started in 2014, and in 2014, what was that? Career ed was probably the highest. Okay, and it goes across. So again, special education way up there, we're at 80 something. And then we go on from there. Next slide. So some of you are probably saying, well, yeah, that's a real big issue in the metro, but it's not a real big issue out west, or we have so many more problems in our area than somebody else, and we don't, and we're going to see that in the next few slides. And so these are the regional observations I found, and the first one, of course, is SPED. Top endorsement for every region, right? That's our biggest area that we're missing. Every region has needed school counselors every single year, except the Western region, and that was only 1 year where they didn't. And so school counselors, we have to think beyond just classroom educators, right? And we do, right? We want you to know this is all encompassing. This is paras, this is, counselors, psychologists, speech path, all of that. But we don't have all the data on that, right? We have the data on the teachers and endorsement areas. And so school counselors are needed, and then here's the shift from the last time that I put this up there. Last time, every region had career ed as a top need, almost every year. This time it's 5 out of 6, so we made a couple changes there. And then 4 out of 6 have elementary as a top need when you look at the years, right, when you look at the trends. And again, thinking in terms of regions, the next slides are going to show you a little bit that they're really kind of all the same. But we're also going to look at public versus private. Okay, so if you're out there and you're like, oh, well, we don't have that issue. You do. We're all very, very similar. Okay, so we talked about endorsement areas. Now we're going to look at total unfilled positions. So according to the Nebraska Department of Education, unfilled refers to a position that was filled by someone that wasn't fully qualified to actually teach there, or that was totally left vacant. Okay, so these are unfilled. So it's not necessarily that nobody's teaching these classes, right? It's that it could be somebody that's not fully certified or fully qualified. And there's our trends from 2010, which was when the report started without a whole bunch of data, all the way up to the 21-22 school year. Over the past 10 years, we've increased by almost 400 unfilled positions, which averages to approximately 215 a year. So this year clearly was the highest, right? We're just continuing on our trend. And then when you go to the next slide and look at vacant, vacant means it wasn't filled at all. Okay, that's when we're starting to see programs being cut. That's when we're starting to see people teaching completely out of their area or just not even being there. And so our vacancy data had a little bit of a decline in 2018, but in general has been on the rise as well. So why? Why are we not filling these? Okay, so again, according to the survey, there's just a general decrease in completers, right? And so if there's a decrease in completers, we don't have enough people to fill these positions. And that's when we start looking at the top left, which is there's no applicants. Okay, and so the blue lines are public school systems or districts, and the orange lines are the private school systems. Okay. You'll notice they're really pretty similar as we go through this. Right, so when you look at the no applicants, we're on the rise, of course. And then the bottom left is really interesting because now that there's no applicants, teachers really get a choice, right? You get to choose those new teachers where you want to go, and it's kind of playing the game. And so when you look at that bottom left, those are qualified applicants that refuse that position. Okay? On the survey, you don't get the chance to provide they didn't take it because of this or because of that. You just say you offered it and it was refused. And so you can see the increase from 2018 to now, right, on how many are saying no. And then the bottom right, that's just the position wasn't filled, right? They have nobody. They couldn't do it. We get calls every day, or emails every day that say, do you have anybody? Do you have anyone that could possibly leave early, that could possibly come teach for us? And it's the struggle. Okay. All right, so what are they doing about it? What are schools doing about it? So, again, based on the survey, right, there are several different options they could choose. Top left, they decided to hire a person who holds a provisional endorsement, not a provisional certificate, a provisional endorsement. So they have some classes, they've taken some work, they could probably teach it, right? That's where we're at on the top left, the light blue. Bottom left, they hired a person that was not appropriately endorsed, okay? And you can see that on an increase, right? They're not appropriately endorsed. endorsed, but they're a body. They're a person that's in there that could be in that classroom. And then on the right, the dark blue, hired a person that holds a transitional certificate. So those would be the programs where they're second career people. Right? So they were an accountant or something, and they think they can teach business, so they come to us, we get them a transitional, and they're taking programs while they're teaching. Next step. And so then these are the other three. There are more options for solutions, but only like 2 or 3 more. So I tried to pick the ones that would be most beneficial for you. Top left, they utilize distance education or a collaborative arrangement with another entity, which you can see is on the rise, which makes sense, right? When you think about COVID and how far we've had to come with digital technology and partnering with schools or combining classes or things like that. Think about your AP, your dual enrollment, classes like that. Bottom left, utilize existing staff not appropriately endorsed. So before, it was hire somebody that was not appropriately endorsed. Now we're looking at you're reassigning a teacher in your building to go and teach that, even though they're not appropriately endorsed. And then on the right, in the dark blue, hire or utilize a substitute teacher to fill a position, which is where we try to help, right? We try to help with the transitional certificates. We try to help to get our students in there and stuff for you, but this is our reality. And it's really, I know you're aware of it. I know you're living it every single day. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that there's data backing you up. That it's not just you saying, you know, this is what I'm being asked to do, this is what's happening. The principals are reporting it, the superintendents are reporting it, and it is important to actually report that data. Especially when we saw that 1920 school year or the 2021 school year where people didn't report it. So that kind of skews the data a little bit. So with all of this data, this is when we all got together and we said something's got to be done, right? You can see the trends. The trends are so visible right now that we have to do something. And so NACTE decided we need to put something on. We need to get everybody together around the same table. Because we know your school's working on it, and we know your district's working on it, and your ESU is working on it. So what can we do to work together as an entire state to get more students, to keep more teachers, and keep them in Nebraska? And that's when we put on the summit, which I'm going to turn back over to Jenny.
All right, so what April said is truly what drove us to get the summit together is we're having these conversations, but we need action. So we put the summit together last October. We all met in Kearney, and as you can see, we had some sponsors, and you can see those sponsors on the slide in a partnership also with the ESU. And because of those sponsorships, and remember that national organization, AACTE, their grant money, we were able to host this summit. And next slide, please. So there you can see a list of who participated. We tried to get every representative, or not representative, but we wanted to have every area in education represented. We had higher ed, we had administrators, those teachers were represented. We had ESUs, we had public, private, all sorts of representation. But what I want to point out is that middle picture. That is a map of where the representation came from, and we were so happy that all corners of the state were well represented. That made a huge impact on the conversations later that day. Next slide, please. So here's what we did. We had a National Organization of Administrators speaker come in and talk about national data, and then we presented April's data. And so we had the data for us to work with. That was our foundation. And then we talked about barriers. What is stopping us from filling these positions and possible solutions? And so that's where we funneled down to the end of the day, action. Next slide, please. And I have to tell you, those who attended, they worked. We put them to work, and they were very receptive. People dug in. We had great conversations around the tables. And we identified priorities of things that need to be addressed, and we also just talked about solutions like, hey, we're doing this, what are you doing? And you know, around the tables, the different schools were able to share some solutions and help other districts and systems. So it was a great It was a productive day, plus it gave us information to move forward. And Sarah's going to wrap us up.
The thing that made the summit a little bit different than other types of events is the priority was not, let's talk about it, let's walk away, and then when we come back together again the next year, let's talk about it some more. The whole purpose of that day was to leave with some type of action plan. And leave with an action plan developed by stakeholders of the Nebraska education community. So it wasn't one singular group. What we discovered very quickly is everyone agrees it's our issue, and unless we are all on the same page or all kind of working in concert with each other, it will be very difficult to solve the issue. So you talk about team, it was a great team. There were 4 priorities that emerged, and you can see them up there: certification, praxis, recruitment and retention of the workforce, and marketing and elevating the profession. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So we had task forces that we established around those, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But each task force had to meet twice between meeting date in November and this last June. And more than 50% of the participants in the summit were on 2 different task forces. So everybody's busy with their day jobs, but they obviously felt this was a really important topic. And we've got their final reports, action plans, recommendations that we are finishing compiling, and at NDE days here in July, we will release those and hopefully then continue carrying those forward. All right, next slide, please. So the task force highlights. And you're getting, this is like, ta-da, breaking news. No one's seen this stuff before, so you're the first. The Praxis Task Force, one of the things I want to make sure that we understand is praxis and certification, when we talked about them in October, were kind of not stagnant, but there were some similarities in terms of those things. People were frustrated with a lot of aspects about both of those areas. The legislature met and started moving on both of those areas. So the task forces were trying to make some recommendations as well as put together some action plans at the same time that the legislature was also addressing those issues, which made it a little bit of a moving target. So the Praxis Committee ultimately felt like the Praxis Core was a huge barrier. Now I want to make sure that I'm really clear. That is not a statement on a reduction of quality. In state statute, all teachers have to prove a basic skills competency. Strongly support that. The committee does not feel that that can best be measured by a singular test that costs hundreds of dollars. And now we're not making money. So the committee ultimately said, we don't want it at all. At the same time, the legislature is talking, and so we had to shift gears a little bit because that was not the way that the legislature was going to maybe support anything. So that committee actually put together a position statement that got sent to senators as LB 1218 was making its way through, and suggested doing away with it altogether, but more specifically said at the very least you need to adopt multiple measures so that there are other ways that we can demonstrate that competency. More on that to come. Certification was in a very similar situation. Expanding pathways, not reducing quality, but expanding pathways, making it easier for someone with a full certificate from another state, South Dakota, who wants to just drive across the border to teach in a school in Nebraska without paying $30,000 and having to take 15 hours. Or for an example, is that you? That's you. Well, we're working on it. Or an existing Nebraska teacher shouldn't have a harder path to add an endorsement than someone coming in through some other alternative pathways. So while those discussions were happening, the legislature was also working on alternative pathways, and NDE was also working within rule to make some expansion. So those things are in process. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be moving forward, which is tremendous. Marketing and elevating the profession. There's one bullet under there which is significantly underselling the work that that group did and what's come out of that. This is a huge piece that had a lot of discussion, and this task force, you know, the I Love Public Schools campaigns or any of those PR kinds of things are certainly important. But this task force spent a lot of time talking about the importance of community, talking about the importance of business community. So engaging people beyond educators and engaging them beyond, I need you to support the scoreboard at the football field, or we need you to volunteer as a parent for the carnival, or whatever. Really being involved in how do we get people into the profession and how can we retain them. We have a number of communities in this state that the school is a real social hub and keeps that community vibrant. And so communities are heavily invested in their schools. Recruitment and retention also sounds like a nice, neat, wrapped up bow. That's a ginormous area. So, and ginormous, I was a former English teacher, so that's an official word that we use a lot. Recruitment and retention, they subdivided into recruitment and retention, and then subdivided within that, because it's just such a huge realm, and they still didn't probably scratch the surface of some things. But they looked at pathways to education. How can we get students from high school through the certification requirements into classrooms? And what does that look like? And how can we be innovative? They looked at, obviously, para to teacher pathways, student teaching. How does that look? Or how can that look different than it has maybe historically when we all went through? Again, without compromising quality, but knowing we have to evolve with what the situation and the environment is dictating. Teacher induction and teacher mentoring programs, those came out, especially for our newer teachers, in terms of how are we helping them acclimate so that they remain. We all know that this is a very fascinating, might be a word I'm going to use, environment in which to be an educator at whatever level. And so how do we help our new people to Nebraska or to the classroom be equipped to work within that environment? Professional learning, whether it's teaching, you're renewing your teaching certificate, whether it's expanding your skill set, how can we be delivering these things differently, better? And then wellness, and that's like all kinds of wellness for all kinds of educators. That's super, super important. So you can see the work that happened, certainly not in isolation, and certainly this is not, here is our plan for Nebraska. That's not the intent of these task forces. But the intent of the task forces is to put some things together that are solid to start the conversation, to try to complement efforts that individual districts or other organizations are doing, and or to help inform future strategies or things. I mean, maybe there's 4 things that every district needs to have in a teacher mentor program. Well, certainly we could roll that out and have that be a cohesive, comprehensive kind of program. Next slide, please. So, I guess you can, this is just another way of what I just shared with prettier graphics. So, if you didn't get it the first time, here it is the second time. Next slide. So, statewide happenings. One of the things that's really a priority is, for NACTE, is that it was never higher ed's intent to become the coordinator of educator shortage solutions. That's not our role. It shouldn't be our role. But we are very committed to continuing to help coordinate and lead the conversations to make sure that they don't stop. I think that's the important piece. Anything that we've talked about it should complement or enhance what your districts are doing. You have districts that are extremely innovative, that are really aggressive about what they are doing in your region or in your school to enhance, retain, recruit teachers, involve community. And then you have some districts that, due to 1,000 different reasons, are maybe less adept at that. And so part of the conversation needs to be, how can we help everyone? But you can see some of the statewide happenings. Obviously, the individual districts. LB 1218 did a lot. It didn't do, the ninth hour kind of changed a little bit, but we still have the praxis. However, it's not an entrance requirement. So a student can get through their whole, they don't have to take the praxis core to get into a teacher ed program. That's a huge step in the right direction. Because no longer will that be the barrier to keeping people out. It also gave more money for loan forgiveness. So, I mean, maybe we would have liked it in a different format, but it's more money, and so who's going to complain about that? That was tremendous. NDE, they have partnered with a lot of different stakeholders, and they're working to make sure that the legislative directives when it comes to certification and some of the other rules and regulations are being implemented so that we can get those things up and running right away, which will help alleviate things. Rule changes, you know, those have to go through the governor, and so sometimes they stop and they don't happen, but we keep continuing to work with them, and NDE continues to promote them. One of the things we're really proud of is the American Association of School Personnel Administrators used Nebraska's shortage summit as a model and put on a national educator shortage summit where we got to participate and facilitate. So, like most things, Nebraska's cutting edge, and we want to have the conversation. Not every state can talk with all their stakeholders around the same table, but we can. Next slide, please. So, we are really excited to be here in front of teachers. To that end, NSEA has been at the table from the very beginning. So I want to make sure you're aware we want teachers involved in the conversations that we're trying to put together, and NSEA has been very responsive in attending and being part of those. But we visited with lots of groups. So we've been in front of the State Board of Education, we've been in front of all the human resources folks. We're trying to tell everyone April's data, because they might have their own data, but they don't see the trend data. There's nowhere else out there that you can find that trend data put together, and that's really what tells the story about what we need to do, or maybe what we need to be prepared for. And so we're talking to a lot of different audiences. Other states have contacted us, because apparently if you're first, then you're the expert. So people, which is great, we're happy to share. We want other people to make sure that they have teachers, because then they can come to Nebraska, potentially, and replace the ones that we're losing to other states. We want to continue to be involved in that legislative advocacy, and this year will be really a fascinating legislative year, especially when it comes to education. So we will all need to be vigilant and staying involved with that. And we're super excited, maybe fingers crossed, to potentially host a Summit 2.0. And that will probably be dependent upon some money coming in, which hopefully it will. But our plan would be to come and look at the data and say, we did this in October of 2021. Now it's whenever we get the money and decide we're going to have it. Where are we at? What are people doing? Let's share. That's the beauty of education. I want to share it with you, and you can take it and mold it and make it your own without having to start from scratch. Because again, it's the collaboration that's really going to make this work. Next slide, please. One of the other big pieces, this came out of the National Shortage Summit. 5 shifts to address the national educator shortage. And we can send this link, it's out there now, so we can certainly send this. But after the national shortage, which had representatives from across the country talk about the same things that we did here in Nebraska, it's basically shifting, and it's a lot about culture. It's not all about money, because money's really great, but if you still don't get a plan period, and you still have classes of 67, that only feels good for a little bit. So there's some other things that need to happen in a different way. And again, education, and I'm an educator lifelong, has not evolved as quickly or maybe as innovatively as other professions as the world has evolved. I mean, when you think back to your schooling experience, it's pretty similar to what we have now. And that's not bad, and that's not wrong. But there are some things that may need to evolve in order for us to continue to survive and thrive with quality teachers for our students. Next slide, please. So, it is important that while we're up here talking to you, we're all in this together. Interesting recession fact. If you're listening to the news at all, that's a word that's getting tossed around. Nationally, in 2008, which is when we had or before we had the last recession, or 2009, we had, this is national, 3.2 million teachers. Then the recession hit, and if you were old enough to be teaching then, your district riffed 1 million people because they couldn't afford it. We lost over 100,000 teachers. We still have not recovered back to that original 3.2 million. So when you think about it that way, we had this many, we went to this many, and we're still slowly building, and now we're potentially hitting another recession where we could then have still fewer get rid. So there's a lot of factors. There's nothing we can do about that. That's just sort of how it's happening. But it is interesting when you think about that. This requires everyone to be a part of this. Next slide, please. And so what we want to ask you is there's a QR code on your tables, and it says NSEA Teacher Shortage Questionnaire. We tried to make it really obvious what that was. So if some point today you would fill that out, that'd be great. It is a Google form, so if you're not on Google signed in and you can't get to it, you'll have to sign in later, or if you're not able to, you can email us or just not participate.
Can we share that? Can we share this?
Sure.
There are 2 different QR codes. That one's different.
Okay, let me back up. These are 2 different QR codes. This one then is to deal with the task force, the 4 task forces. Praxis, certification, marketing, the profession, and recruitment and retention. So this one would be, which one do you think is the most important or the priority issue?
Multiple choice.
So if you would select that, the one on your table, we want your input. And absolutely the one on your table, the people, if you pass this one on, they don't know what we're talking about here with task forces. That's probably maybe not as pertinent. However, they'd be able to identify which topic was most important. The other one talks about what your input is as an individual teacher and what you think some priorities would be. So we have a wider range of teacher input, and we would really appreciate that. Next slide, please. We're going to hang around here a little bit because I know we stand maybe between you and your drive home after a really productive conference. But on behalf of NACTE, myself, and my children, although we're not in P12 anymore, that's just new. I want to say thank you. Teaching is the best profession, but even in ideal circumstances, it is the most challenging profession. And we've had less than ideal circumstances for a couple of years here. So I appreciate, on behalf of NACTE, we appreciate your continued efforts in the classroom with those kids. There's not another profession that has such a significant impact on people's lives and what they do than teaching. And that is a tribute to all of you. And you're to be commended for everything you do in the summer. You're here, this is extra, and during the school year. So we want to say thank you. And if there are any questions right now, we're happy to take a few.
My question has to do with a comment the commissioner made this morning about praxis, which made it sound like he alluded to the fact that we're fighting against the creators of praxis who don't want to lose that business.
So Tricia asked about Dr. Lundstedt was with us this morning via Zoom and said that he's heard that the Praxis Test Company has hired a lobbyist for Nebraska to keep that in our, of course they are, because they're making how much? A lot of money. I'm sure they are. So I guess, and I should probably take my name tag off as I say this, because I'm not necessarily officially
as an individual.
Right, speaking as Sarah Sreda, the private citizen, my thought on that is we should never let a vendor, whether it's practice or anything else, a vendor should not make educational decisions.
Amen.
That being said, if you track the legislature at all, that may not mean anything. So what needs to happen is we need to be vigilant and we need to be active, not crazy, there's a difference. We need to be active and use data and show
Here's why we don't need the praxis at all, but preferably we don't need the praxis only. I mean, that would be higher ed's perspective. If you want to show basic skills competency, I mean, again, it's their shred. If you graduate from an NDE-approved high school, I'm assuming you're basically competent in math, reading, and writing. You're not going to get anything more in the 3 months between that and when you start a college program. But if we could have multiple methods, that would be great. So that exactly could be. I'm sure ETS is working on it. We've gotten emails that they want to know what the percentage of students of color aren't passing, because that's one of our big issues is we have a lot of students of color who don't necessarily pass the first time. And they are already sharing data that disproves that. So I'm sure that that's on, so bring it. That's what I would say.
All right, I found another pin somewhere over here.
One of my biggest concerns is the narrative right behind public education right now, nationally at the state level and then in our communities. And I know that was in your presentation. I'm just curious, what are some of the strategies your task force at the summit might have come up with? Because the people who are out there creating the noise, it seems to be pretty well organized. So what are we doing to combat that, to be more proactive and less defensive?
So I'll let my colleagues speak here in a minute. So we aren't necessarily organizing anything. Again, it goes back to the collective we may need to your point. Part of the discussion of that task force, and this is probably not going to be very popular and it does not mean to be insulting, is we are our own worst enemy sometimes as a profession. If I'm an engineer and I don't like my job at Kiewit, I complain about Kiewit as an employer. I don't say, don't be an engineer. And what we hear in education is, oh my God, you do not want to be a teacher. Not, you should not be a teacher at XYZ middle school because the culture's bad or whatever. We throw the whole profession under the bus. And I don't think that's really what we intend when we say that, but that's what happens. So I think one of the things we and it's P20, it's everybody. What we need to do is stop doing that and saying, oh yeah, I had a class from HE double hockey sticks this year, and boy, it makes me not want to be a teacher, but I can rally. Now, to the organization, when you're talking, even if you watch a school board meeting, if you watch a state board of education meeting, if you watch any of those meetings, there are organized people, and they are winning the public campaign because they're out there. So I guess one of the things that would be a suggestion that is part of some of the things that they talked about is positive messaging. Having other people show up at those meetings so that when someone is up there railing on a singular issue, then someone else is standing up and saying, here's the celebrations. And that's just one of the things. I don't know how organized certain entities can be, but certainly individual groups organizing and doing things is also going to be valuable. I don't know.
And our retired teachers are going to help us a lot with that at the next state school board meeting. Just because we hear that a lot too, but then we don't want to send, well, Stacy volunteered, we're sending her in on August 5th. No, I'm kidding, because then that target gets on her back.
Right.
And then that administrator is like, oh, how, because we are folding as, not as individuals, but as a whole to that very, very small minority, but loud group. And it doesn't help with some of the leadership we have that have been elected in the state, and I'll leave it at that.
And we need to be doing those big things. We need to have our voices heard. But as teachers or educators, you can also do the little things every day in your classrooms. You can identify future teachers that are before you every day. And you can talk to those students about what a great profession it is. And not just those students you've identified, but everyone in your classroom. But those little things can also make big differences.
One of the other things as president of NACTE is I'm on the Midwest Regional Board, and so I hear from the other states and what's happening there. And that's another thing to pinpoint and highlight is how good Nebraska actually is in terms of being able to make those statements, to talk to the board, to call your senators, to do all of that stuff, and how connected we are as a state. And so one of those things in terms of public publicity needs to also be, in my opinion, that Nebraska, we're doing things right? Like, we don't necessarily have to change a whole lot. We're doing okay. And that's one of the positive messages out there. Like, we are already doing this. We already have really safe schools, right? That was one of the big things after all these school shootings and everything. We need more, we need to arm our teachers. We have safe schools. Here's what's in place. You know, just spreading that positive message instead of always being quiet, like, because we are, right? Nebraska, Sarah has said this before, Nebraska, we don't
Nebraska
tell,
nice.
right? We're Nebraska nice. We don't really profess our amazingness when we should. And in terms of legislation, some of the other states are going down those scary paths, right? And as long as we remain vigilant and we stay there and we just keep that constant buzz and voice in the ear that we're doing okay and we're doing things right, that's going to go a long ways. We saw it this year. Just when she was saying praxis and certification and the moves that were being made there, they weren't being made 2 years ago, right? They weren't being made 3 years ago, and they are moving, and they are moving fast. And as long as we stay a part of the conversation as a group, not as an individual, not as a specific district, right? When you have power behind it with a lot of people and different organizations, where it's not just NACTE, it's not just higher ed, you know, when it's K-12 and ESUs and administrators and everybody else, that spreads like wildfire across the state and then across the country, which it's done.
And I'm just going to add to that we need to call people out.
Yep.
If your administrator, are adding to these things, we need to know that. We need to be able to call people out. And when you're in the grocery store line, I know it's tough. But when somebody starts griping, just turn around. And I was at a luncheon years ago, and this elderly gentleman said to me, I hate unions. And I said, you hate teachers? And he said, I didn't say that. And I said, well, that's who we represent. Then what do you hate? Tell me. Well, he hated the guy that brought a gun to the blah, blah, blah back in 1957. And I was like, let's talk. And then he said to me, I think we agree on more things than we disagree on. But you had to say back. You can't just keep quiet about it. At church, at the grocery store. And someone said this morning, tell your story. Don't talk about what they're saying. Talk about what you're doing and what's happening in your classroom. Because there is really good stuff in Nebraska. We're very proud of that, but that negative narrative takes over.
And I think back to your point when we're talking about those bigger, really public venues where people are getting their 15 minutes of fame over and over and over and over, organization is important. So whether it's a local union, whether it's a parent PTO group, this is the thing. It doesn't just have to fall on teacher shoulders. It doesn't just have to fall on educator preparation shoulders. It has to fall on all of us. So like legislatively, those larger groups, and I see your hand up. Well, you're getting tired, we'll get to you. They coordinate, so if there's an issue, so like on Praxis, the administrative group, NSEA, higher ed, and school boards, there's conversation so that there is it's not necessarily united because every organization has their own perspective, but there is a coordinated kind of I was going to say attack, and that's a negative message, a coordinated message that goes through. But the other thing I would tell you is we talk a lot about how, one voice doesn't matter. What I've learned in the legislature, if we're just talking about that, NSEA may have their position and share their position, but numbers and quantity matters, which means you need to go to your own senator and representative and say, I, as a private citizen not representing my school district, unless you have the ability to do that, am against this, and I know all this because of my position as a teacher. So just saying here's a one letter with 16 signatures, guess what? That's one letter. If you send 16 letters, now you're sending 16 letters. So there are some of those things that we just need to tweak because education has not had to be this active on all fronts for a really long time. And, you know, we're peaceful people. We want to mediate. We want everyone to feel good. And we need to get out of our own way and still feel good and be positive, but be active advocates.
Are there things being done to help administrators be more supportive, especially in the area of unruly students, instead of just deal with it?
Well, I'd like to say that was our area of expertise, so I could give you the answer, but I'm not sure that would be accurate. I know that NDE has the Nebraska Principal Performance Standards that they are rolling out, which is about how those administrative leaders need to lead maybe differently than we've seen. And that's culture, that's building trust, and not that that's going to fix the children who are, you know, you have large classes or you have a class that has a large composition of students with behavior issues, but some of those things ultimately will do that. So I know NDE is trying to do that. The push for mental health and mental health dollars certainly will help. But in all honesty, sometimes it's personnel. You need more teachers in your classroom, or you need more pairs, and there's not the dollars in the budget to hire those people. And so we've got to work that. I don't know if either of you have any suggestions with that. I don't know. I don't think the groups got into it to that degree. That's certainly an issue that NCTE talks about in terms of management, and you're represented on that group. That's the group that advises the Board of Education, because our student population is changing, and the pandemic didn't help some of that.
Any other questions? All right, let's give these ladies a big thank you very much.